In this video, we're going to talk about the 10 most common mistakes people make starting seeds. Let's get into it. Mistake number 1, they don't store their seeds properly. I see so many people suggesting you should put them in the freezer so they last a long time, and that's really bad advice. If you're going to store the seeds for 6 months or less, you can just leave them at room temperature. If you've just bought some seeds and you plan to germinate them this spring, don't worry about storing them, just leave them on your desk. If you're going to store them for longer than 6 months, it's a good idea to put them in the refrigerator, not the freezer. The refrigerator is cool and dry, and both things are good for making your seeds last longer. Now, what do you put the seeds in? Well, don't put them in plastic. Put them in a little paper envelope. It's really important that excess moisture is able to leave the seed. When you put seed that has moisture in it inside a plastic bag, you will end up getting mold on those seeds and then they're dead. Now, I make my own little plastic envelopes, and I've even made a video to show you how to do that. Mistake number 2, not pre-treating your seeds properly. If you're new to this hobby, you might think that, well, you just take seeds and put them in the soil and they'll grow. But that's not necessarily true. A lot of seed need some kind of pre-treatment before they'll germinate. If your interest is primarily vegetables, they need very little pre-treatment. If you get them moist, they will germinate. But as soon as you start germinating other things like perennials and annuals and shrubs, you have to learn about the proper pre-treatment procedures. Things like scarification, stratification. These things are all critical to proper germination. And I've made a separate video to walk you through the process of deciding what kind of pre-treatment you should apply to your seeds. If you've purchased seeds and they come in a standard seed package, that will usually include the pre-treatment information. But if you have seeds that does not have that information, watch my other video that explains various types of pre-treatment, and then figure out what pre-treatment your seeds need. Mistake number 3, stratifying your seeds in the fridge. Now, there's nothing wrong with stratifying them in the fridge. The problem is that most people take their seed when they're still dry and they put them in the fridge, and they call that cold stratification. But that doesn't work. To understand this, let me explain how a seed actually germinates. The seed sitting on your desk is now quite dry and it's doing very little. It's just sitting there, kind of in hibernation. The first thing that has to happen with all seeds is that they have to absorb some water. That water starts the germination process. Now, that doesn't mean that the seed will actually create a root. It may need some other pre-treatment, but the water has to come first. When people talk about cold stratification, what they really mean is cold, moist stratification. You have to soak those seeds in water and then put them in the fridge for the cold treatment. That's really easy to do if you use my baggie method, and I have a video that explains that process. It's one of the reasons I like that method the best for germinating seeds. It's so easy to give seeds different temperatures and move them in and out of the fridge. It's so hard to do that with pots. Now, there are a few exceptions where seeds want dry stratification, but that's a rare case. Mistake number 4, using a pot that's too small. I see lots of people suggesting ideas on the internet how you can germinate seeds in things other than pots. People use eggshells. Those eggshells are pretty much useless. By the time that seed germinates, it's already too big for the eggshell, and it needs to be transplanted. Why bother doing that? You might as well germinate them right in the larger pot. Using things like egg cartons also doesn't work. They're too small. A lot of people use jiffy pellets, also called jiffy pucks. These things are little round discs, and when they absorb water, they expand. But they're still too small for seedlings, and the soil in them isn't particularly good. I really don't like them. People also use those cell packs, those plastic containers that come in a set of 6. Now, that's okay if you're germinating lots of plants and you have limited space, but the plants outgrow that space very quickly. What I recommend is that you get some real pots, 3 to 4 inch diameter pots and use those. If you get plastic ones, you'll be able to reuse them for 10 years. And in fact, what I do is I just collect used pots from other people. So I always have free pots to use. Your plants will grow better if you put them in a good sized pot. Mistake number 5, using a poor quality soil. Now we talk about using soil, but in fact, nobody germinates seeds in soil. What we use is a soilless mix, which is mostly either peat moss or coir. In either case, it's important to get a good quality product. Use a name brand product. Don't go to the dollar store and get something cheap. That may be okay when you're potting up house plants or filling outside containers. But when you're starting seeds, you want to start them off in a good quality product. Personally, I use ProMix and have for many years. It's a reliable product. But there are other good products on the market. Once you've found a product you're happy with, use it every year, because the way you water and treat those plants will be the same year after year. If you're always buying a different brand product, you have to relearn how to wet that material each year. Get your seeds started in some good potting media. Mistake number 6, and this is probably the biggest one, especially for new gardeners. When you first put the seed in the soil, it is important to keep it moist. You don't want that seed absorbing some water and then drying out, because that will kill the seed. So it is important to keep them moist. But once that seed germinates, you have to start letting the pot dry out. When a seed actually germinates, what it does is creates the root first. You won't see that. You'll be looking at your pots thinking, this thing hasn't germinated. But in fact, underground, it's already germinated and already made a root. And once that root is a good size, only then does it make the top part, the green leaves that you see. So by the time you see something, it already has a good root system, and it's time to start drying out that pot. Now, this is a tricky process, particularly with small seedling. You don't want it too dry, but you also don't want it too wet. Water that seedling and then leave it alone until the surface of the soil starts to dry out. Then water it again. What happens if you keep them too wet? Well, you'll know pretty soon, because one of two things happen. The first problem is damping off, which is a fungal disease that kills small seedlings. And you almost never get damping off if you keep your pots a little drier. That fungus, that needs moisture to grow. And most people who have that problem are overwatering their seedlings. The second thing you'll notice is that you might get fungus gnats, which are little tiny flies. Now, they don't really do a lot of damage to the plant, but most people don't want them flying around their house. Fungus gnats only lay their eggs in moist soil. If you keep that top layer a little drier, you won't have fungus gnats. Don't overwater your seedlings. Mistake number 7, not using a fan. I don't see a lot of people recommending a fan, but it's one of the best things you can do for your seedlings. Now, it's not absolutely necessary. In a drier house environment, you may get away without it, but a fan going 24/7 will help dry out that soil. It tends to overcome your tendencies to overwater your seedlings. It helps prevent damping off disease. And it probably even makes life more difficult for fungus gnats. If you start seeing some of these problems, get a fan on those plants right away. As the seedlings grow, that fan will move the seedlings a little bit. You want to see the seedlings wiggle a bit. That makes for a stronger seedling. Good idea to use a fan 24/7 until you're ready to take those seedlings outside. Myth number 8, not using a heating mat properly. Now, the first thing to understand is that you don't need a heating mat. I've been germinating seeds for many years. I've probably germinated 2,000 different species of seeds. I've never once used a heating mat, so it's not absolutely necessary. But a lot of seeds germinate more quickly at a higher temperature. So it's a good idea to use a heating mat, particularly if you're trying to do this in a cold basement. The problem is that people use the heating mat to grow their seedlings, and that's a big mistake. Seeds like to be warmer to germinate, but once they've germinated, once you see something above the ground, they want to grow cool. So use the heating mat to germinate seeds and then remove them from the heating mat, cool them down. You will get shorter, stronger seedlings that way. A heating mat should only be used for germinating the seeds. Myth 9, not removing a dome over top of your seedlings. So should you use a dome at all? It is a good idea to have a dome during the germination process. Remember that once the seeds absorb some moisture, they start the process of germination, and they can't dry out during that step. If they do, they die. So you want to keep the humidity and moisture levels higher during germination. But once you see seedlings above ground, take the dome off. Now you can do that kind of slowly, kind of get them used to a drier environment. So you open the dome a little bit one day, a couple days later you open it more. By the end of the week, the dome's off. Don't grow seedlings inside a dome. They do much better in drier air, and you will have less disease problem. A dome is a great tool for germination, not for growing seedlings. And finally, we come to number 10. This is also a really big problem. People do not give their seedlings enough light. Think about what happens in nature. These seeds germinate, and as soon as they have some leaves above ground, they get full sun, or at least part shade if they're underneath another bush. That's very high light compared to what we have in our homes, or even compared to various types of lighting systems we can use. So in nature, seedlings get much more light than you think. Now, I know everyone has limitations in what they have. You only have certain kinds of windows. They only face certain directions. You only have so much space for seedlings. And that means that there's a limit as to what you can do for your seedlings. But in most cases, the seedlings I see posted online are seedlings that have not gotten enough light. When they get tall and spindly looking, they are not getting enough light. Give them as much as you can. In fact, this is one reason why I like winter sowing. You put the seeds outside and they germinate with sunlight. And those seedlings will be very short, tough little plants because they're getting the right amount of light. If you're not familiar with winter sowing, I have a video that will show you how to do that. It's actually one of the easiest ways to grow plants from seeds. There you have it. Those are the top 10 reasons why people have problems growing seeds. If you follow the advice in this video, you won't have any trouble growing things from seed. But there's a lot more to know, and I've created several other videos, things like stratification, how to scarify seeds. What do you do if you have really tiny seeds? You might want to treat those a little differently. I've put all those videos together into one YouTube playlist, and I'll put a link to those in the top right-hand corner. I've also started making a series of videos on different types of plant propagation, things like growing from cuttings, how do you layer shrubs, that sort of thing. And I have a playlist of those as well, and I'll put those in the bottom corner. Propagating plants is so much fun, but there are a few tricks to learn. Once you know those, this is actually really easy stuff. Have fun in the garden.